Hey y'all, Coach in the Fight here during our new moon report and what may turn out to be the most important new moon report we've ever done. The reasons why, first of all, there seems to be a discrepancy in the holy day feasts. Talking about Passover, unleavened bread, and the feast of first fruits that come in the first month of the holy year, the month Abib. Somehow it seems that our calendars are pointing to different days than each other and to what the lunar data says that they should fall on. So in this video, we're going to go in and we're going to use astronomical information ahead of when the new moon is going to fall so that we can be sure to get a clear glimpse of the moon when it comes later in this month. We're going to use an application called Sundroid, and we're also going to look in the book of Enoch at how we are supposed to calculate the new moons and the new months. Because it is extremely important to get the date of Passover correct, and so we're going to try to do so by any means necessary. Stay tuned. Coach in the Fight here, getting ready for our new moon report for the first month of the holy year. That's right, y'all. We're getting ready for New Year's when we're going around the Hebrew calendar or the Enoch calendar or the sacred calendar, the original calendar, the Father's calendar. Talking about that calendar that existed before man making calendars was cool. Alright, so the first month of the year, some call it Nissan, some call it Abib, has a couple of other names that you can find in the scripture, but we're talking about the first holy month of the year, and we want to do a new moon report. As you know, over here at Hermas Academy, we tend to do our new moon reports early, even before the moon comes out, and that's because we use technical methods to do so. We look at data, we look at numbers, we look at spreadsheets in order to see when the new moon is going to appear, giving a heads up for all of the people who go out and do it the correct way by actually viewing the moon in the sky, giving those guys a heads up on what days they are actually supposed to go out there and gaze up at the sky looking for that very small sliver of a moon. But as you can see here, we're looking at our source that we usually go with, the U.S. Naval Observatory, looking at their data services. Appears that they have shut down the website, at least for a little while, until April the 30th of 2020. They're not providing us with any of this astronomical information for us to go in and see when the new moons are. Now, I find it a bit strange that they would have to take out their website for modernization, but that's not the only thing that we're going to find strange or interesting or worth a second look as we go down here and look at some of this stuff. Now, the most important thing about the first month, Nissan or Abib, is that it has in it the holy feast days of Passover and unleavened bread, and the third feast of the year, which is first fruits. Now, if you're familiar with our channel, you know that we have been putting out a lot of classes associated with unleavened bread, associated with Passover, and we're going to do some more dealing with first fruits because these are important feast days of the year. You can check our channel for some of those classes, how unleavened bread is the mark on our hands and on our forehead. You can see classes on how Passover can prevent you from getting coronavirus or any other plague throughout the year. You can see how not performing these feasts can get you cut off from your people or from Israel. You can see how these feast days are associated with the third temple and all kinds of stuff as we put out these classes, this vital information associated with the feast of Passover and unleavened bread. But this particular class, we want to talk about the new moon report. We'll probably have a follow-up class after the new moon is sighted so that we can come in and actually do a when is Passover feast, but because we want to make sure that we know exactly when the new moon falls so we can get that feast day correctly. You know, we have to do it in its season. We can't just do it any day. We're not allowed to get it wrong. So it's extremely important. But since the U.S. Naval Observatory is down and looks a bit suspicious, I would ask you guys to pray for clear skies during the times that we are going to be out there looking for the moon. Whether you're going to be out there or not, pray for clear skies, because there are people around you who will be looking for the new moon, and they might not know how to or know to do so in the first place, and that's pray for clear skies. So do it on yourself. You can start that prayer now and pray as we get closer to that date that we will have clear skies, so that those Levites, those priests, or whoever it is, can go out there and get a good sighting of the new moon and let us know exactly when it is, because that's how you pick Passover. All right, so without the help of the U.S. Navy, let's show you a different method that we can go to calculate the new moon when the month starts, and that's going to use scripture. You always can fall back on scriptural documents. Using other available digital information, we can make a determination on when the new moon should take place. All right, so you guys bear with me as we're going to be looking at some information from a program that I have running on my tablet. I took some screenshots of this information and pasted it up here so that we can get some of the times of the moonrise, the sunrise, the moonset, and the sunset. And we're going to use this information to make the determination on when the new moon should fall. But more importantly, we're going to use the scripture coming out of the book of Enoch. Now, for those of you guys who are wanting to know how it is they calculate the moon and where they get their information from, it should be coming from the book of Enoch. These are one of the first books ever written. I could tell you guys the story about Enoch, but I'll spare you. Just let you know that he was the first guy that actually wrote anything here on our planet. He was actually taught how to write by angels and such. But we're going to use his book on astronomy and show you guys how it is that we calculate the new moon. All right? Coming down here, we're all the way up here in chapter 72, which all of this information will come from chapter 72, chapter 73, maybe chapter 74 out of the book of Enoch. But we're going to jump all the way down here to verse 8. It says, "When the sun rises in heaven, he comes forth through the fourth portal 30 mornings in succession, and sets accurately in the fourth portal in the west of the heaven. And during this period, the day becomes daily longer, and the night nightly shorter to the 30th morning." All right, now this is a fancy way of saying that the year starts with the equinox. That's what he's talking about there when he says that the day becomes longer and the nights become shorter. Up until this point, he was talking about how they were equal. And I can jump all the way down here to when he talks about the 12th month, and I'll come back up there. Verse 32 says, "On that day the night decreases and amounts to 9 parts, and the day to 9 parts, and the night is equal to the day, and the year is exactly as to its days, 364 days." All right, so now this is saying that the night and the day are equal, just to help you get an understanding of what he's talking about when he comes up here and he says that the days get longer and the nights get shorter. Back up here when he's talking about the first month of the year. All the way up here in verse 5, he starts talking about how the sun goes across the sky and talking about these great portals and such. You can push the pause button and read that if you want to. Down here in verse 7, he talks about the first month. And then he tells us how to make the determination of the first month. And that says the days are getting longer and the nights are getting shorter. All right, coming over here to the screenshots that we have, we see that the March equinox falls on the 19th. Now, that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. They usually always fall on March the 20th and March the 19th. That's what makes, or that's the cycle of the Gregorian calendar that we use over here in America. That's how they base their year, based on the sun data. But what we do get out of this information is that this new moon that falls immediately after that equinox will indicate the first moon of the year, or which starts the first month of the year, will start right there in March the 24th, according to what we see there. All right. But one thing you have to understand is you cannot really go by, when man says that there is a new moon, you can't never really go by his definition of a new moon when you're trying to start your calendar. Man is always going to be most of the time 2 days early, because of the way he determines the new moon. See how he's saying that it started right there at 4:30 a.m. That's not when you view the new moon in order to start the month. You really have to see that. And so people will go out and start viewing and looking in the evening time to see the new moon. So the thing about it, your calendar may say new moon on it. The thing about man's new moon is he's counting the zero moon. That's the time when you're not going to see anything at all. If you was to go out there at 4:30 and look for the moon, all you could do is verify, yes, there is absolutely nothing in the sky to see whatsoever. That's what man considers the new moon. But when the Levites and the priests go out to see what they call the new moon, they're actually looking for a small sliver of the moon that they call first light. They're actually looking to see something in the sky. You won't see that on March 24th. You're going to be at least a day and probably 2 days later. But we usually have the U.S. Naval Observatory information to tell us when that will happen. We don't have that information. But let me show you how we're going to do it this year. It's important for us to understand how it is that these calculations are made, because we know that the U.S. Naval Observatory is not always going to be there, and we're not going to have people on YouTube to tell us when the new moon is going to fall either. We really need to know how it's done. And again, we get that information from the book of Enoch. All right, so now in this part of the book, we know when the year starts. Again, it starts with the equinox, when the days start to get longer than the nights. Remember, there are 2 equinoxes on the calendar. One is when the days get longer than the nights. The other one is when the nights get longer than the days. That one falls about 6 months later on. That's not the one that we're talking about to determine the new year. The equinox to determine the new year is when the days get longer than the nights. All right, so now we're up here in chapter 73, and we're going to talk about when the month starts. We already know when the year starts from the information we found in chapter 72. Now up here in chapter 73, we're going to find how it is that we determine when the month starts. Coming back up here to verse 1, if you want, you can hit the pause button and read this information if you want to. Talking about the moon, as you can see right there. But we're going to jump down here to verse 4 and start talking about the moon. Now, I will point out when the scripture says he is talking about the moon. And when he, being Enoch, says he is talking about the sun. And so right here in verse 4, he says, and thus she rises, and her first phase in the east comes forth on the 30th morning, and on that day she becomes visible and constitutes for you the first phase of the moon on the 30th day, together with the sun in the portal where the sun rises. Now, This is Enoch. Again, this was the first documents, probably the very first book that was ever written down here on this planet. And so he has a very sophisticated way of saying what he's trying to say. And it has taken many, many months in order to understand these verses that he's talking about here. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out exactly what he's saying here. But what he's talking about is on the 30th day in the morning time, at the end of the month, in the morning time, you can go out there and you can see a small sliver of the moon. If you go out there a few days before the new moon or the sliver of the moon is seen in the evening time, you could go out there a few days early and look up in the sky early in the morning before the sun rises, and you will see a very small sliver of the moon up there as well. And that's pointing to the end of the month. That's for those who wanted to get a jump on sighting the moon. They would start looking in the morning time at the end of the month to give them kind of a heads up on when they were going to see the sliver of the moon in the evening time, indicating the new month has started. All right. But again, that is the 30th day of the month. All right. So now we're going to jump down here. And here's some of that sophisticated stuff right here, talking about the 14th part of our light. Man, you can imagine how much time it took me to figure that stuff out. But jumping down here in verse 7, it says, "And she sets with the sun, and when the sun rises, the moon rises with him and receives the half of one part of light. And in that night, in the beginning of her morning, in the commencement of the lunar day, the moon sets with the sun and is invisible that night with the 14 parts and the half of one of them." This is talking about the new moon right here. With the one we talked about earlier, how man counts the new moon as the zero moon. That's what it's talking about right here. On the other day, the 30th day, you can see a small sliver in the morning time. But on this day right here, you're not going to see a sliver at all. And that's what he's talking about right here when he says, "is invisible that night with the 14 parts and the half of them." He's saying that this is an absolute zero moon. There's nothing to see at all. All right. Then he goes on to say, "And she rises on that day with exactly a 7th part and comes forth and recedes from the rising of the sun. And in her remaining days, she becomes bright in the remaining 13 parts." Okay, now what that's talking about is the sliver of the moon. See where it says right here, exactly a 7th part. You know that if you think about the moon having 4 phases, each making up of approximately 7 days, it should be clear how he's talking about a 7th part there. You get the first 7 parts in the first 7 days, the second 7th part in the second 7 days, and so forth. All right, so that's how we determine when the new month starts. See up here where it says the morning in the commencement of the lunar day. That's talking about the beginning of the lunar month right there. All right, so now let me show you how this looks using this information over here. Verse 4 says, "And thus she rises, and her first phase in the eve come forth on the 30th morning, and on that day she becomes visible and constitutes for you the first phase of the moon on the 30th day, together with the sun in the portal where the sun rises." All right. Now, when you come over here and you look at the data on the table over here, see how it says morning crescent, meaning there's a crescent of the moon in the morning. But it says 0 right here because nobody goes out to view the moon in the morning. They go out to view the moon in the evening time. And when you go out to view it that evening, you're going to see 0% of the moon illuminated. But if you went out in the morning, you would actually see a morning crescent right there. Now, it said that it rises with, it said that the moon and the sun rises together. As far as the moon and the sun rising together, you see that the moon rises at 6:44 a.m. and the sun rises at 6:48 a.m. Okay, so that's going to be the moon and the sun rising together. That's going to constitute the 30th day. And I do need to point out, without going all the way through the book of Enoch, not every month has 30 days in it. Some months have 29 days in it. Some months only have 29 days opposed to 30. But now we're coming over to the 24th day of the month of March 2020. We see that we also have a zero moon on that day there. So let's jump back over to the Enoch calendar and see what it says. And when she received 1/7 part of the half of her light amounts to 1/7 part and the half thereof. Just talking about how small a sliver you're actually looking for. Then it says down here, and she sets with the sun, and when the sun rises, the moon rises with him and receives the half of one part of her light. And in that night, in the beginning of her morning, is the commencement of the lunar day. All right, now you see right here it says, and she sets with him, talking about the next day, and when the sun rises, the moon rises with him and receives a half of one part of the light. So let's come over here. When the moon and the sun are setting together, you have the moon setting at 7:27 p.m. But when you come down here and look at the dusk time, you'll see that there's still light in the sky at 7:28 p.m. Even though the sun went down at 7:03, it's still going to be too much light out there for you to actually see a moon at all on that night. And so that's why it's saying here that the moon and the sun go down together at the same time. It's talking about dusk time when it actually gets dark. And that's why you're going to see a 0% of the moon, because there's just too much light out there. Anytime the sun is up and you're looking for that small sliver of the moon on this particular night, like this night here, you're not really going to see it. You're going to have to wait to the next night. You always, and for those of you guys who are considering going out to view the moon, and I would advise you to, especially if you are a Levi, a firstborn male between the ages of 30 and 50, I would advise you to start looking at the moon, because one day your expertise on this will be needed. If you're around long enough, it definitely will be needed. And so I will advise you to start trying to figure out what's going on now. And what you're going to find out is when you go out there on that first day looking for the moon, if there's light outside, you're not going to see it. Now, we do go out there on that night to verify that there was a zero moon, so that on the next night we actually start. On the next night, when we do see it, we can blow the horns, blow the trumpets, letting everybody know that yes, this is the beginning of the new day or the new month. Up there is talking about the commencement of the lunar day, or the beginning of the month. That's how you tell when the beginning of the month is. And so now we're to determine when the actual first day starts. We come down here. He says, and is invisible that night with the 14 parts and the half of them. Okay. Then it says, and she rises on that day with exactly a 7th part, and come forth and recedes from the rising of the sun. And in her remaining days, she becomes bright in the remaining days. All right. Now see, it's right here is no longer, the moon is no longer rising with the sun, and there is a visible part there. So let's come over and see what that looks like. Here is the 25th day of the month of March. You can see that there was a sunrise. There will be, this is all futuristic, there will be a sunrise, Lord willing, Father willing, there will be a sunrise at 6:46 a.m. The first light will be at 6:21 a.m., at least in my part of the world. And then, but the moon, she will not rise until 7:42 a.m. And so they're not rising together anymore. And so then you're actually going to see a part of the new moon. You're going to actually see part of the moon. But now, just as an aside note, when you read over there in the books of in the Dead Sea Scrolls and talking about the priestly responsibilities, you will know that on this day, those Levites and priests, they would have been out there for 2 nights, maybe 3 nights, looking to verify this new moon, so that on the 25th, they're actually going to see it. This is going to be after the sun goes down. The sun goes down on the 25th at 7:04 p.m. It'll be dark by 7:28 p.m., but the moon will still be in the sky. It will not go down for another hour later. That gives these guys another hour later. And if I remember correctly, that puts the moon about 15 degrees up in the sky, up somewhere like that. So it's pretty high still in the sky an hour before it sets. And so these guys will actually have time to see that small sliver of a moon, about 2% of the moon, and that's when they will start blowing the trumpets. That's when they will let everybody know that at sundown, that just occurred at 7:04 p.m. started a new month. It just started. There is some confusion there. There's some people who don't quite understand how this all works, especially the ones that believe that the day starts in the morning time opposed to the evening time, like the scripture says, and the evening and the morning was the first day. The day starts in the evening time. It just started on at 7:04 p.m. At 7:04 p.m. was the beginning of a new day, and because they're seeing this 2% moon, it is the beginning of a new month. And so they will start blowing the trumpets, start letting everybody know that they're in a new month. And then the next day, the very next day, when the sun comes up or whenever they feel like it, they will actually start the new moon observances. You'll hear them saying stuff like Shabbat Shalom, peace on the Sabbath day, which is letting people know that we are in the new moon on the very next day. So that will be the 26th day of the month of March. So that right there, according to this information that we're looking at, the 26th day of March will actually be day 1. For us who like to start our days in the morning time, well, when we wake up in the morning on the 26th, we will be in day 1 of the month. All right. Now let's look over here at another calendar. There's one computer calendar here. That puts us right here being day 1 on the 26th of March. Okay. Now we should write that down. March 26th is day 1. Why? When we come over here to the book of Leviticus, chapter 23, we start to see the Father's holy convocations. Now, I will point out in verse 2, it says, concerning the feast of the Lord. I like to bring this out because there is some confusion. People say feast of the Jews. No, these are the feast of the Lord. And so when we jump down here to verse 5, it says, in the 14th day of the first month at even is the Lord's Passover. The 14th day of the first month at even. Okay, so now let's start adding this up. So we want to know, when is Passover of 2020? So we've made the determination that the 26th is day 1. So we can start counting with the 26th being day 1, 27 being day 2, 28 being day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7. That makes the 2nd of April as day 8. So going into the next month, with the 2nd being day 8, you have 9 on the 3rd, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 being on Wednesday, April the 8th. So now, remember we talked earlier about how that will be the full day. Wednesday, April the 8th will be the full day. So the full day of Wednesday, April the 8th will be the 14th, but it actually started the evening before. As the sun went down on the 7th, will actually begin the Passover feast. Now, as an illustration on something you will remember, the Passover supper with the Messiah, he went with his disciples to the Passover feast that evening. They had the foot washing, they had the communion ceremony. He even gave them his last sermon that you can read over there in the book of John. But it was after that that they went up on the mountain where Judas came in and betrayed him. That was the evening starting the beginning of Passover. But then he had to go through his trials. He had to go before the governors and all of those other people down there where they put him on trial. That actually happened during the day part of the 14th. And they put him on the cross during the day part of the 14th. And they put him in the tomb at the end of the day part of the 14th before the Feast of Unleavened Bread would have started. And you say, well, why is all of that important? Well, come over here. Let me show you something. I told you there was going to be something interesting. When we come over here and we look at Google, it says that Passover starts on the 8th. Now, as you can imagine, I've been working on this for a few days because, it seems to be a contradiction. And as serious as this is, I wanted to make sure that I understood who's right and who's not. But there is some ambiguity here. When I look at my hardcover copy, it says that Passover starts on the 8th of April. But it also says, it has a footnote down at the bottom. You want to read that footnote for us, Chris?
All Jewish and Islamic holidays start at sundown the day before they are listed.
And so what day does it list Passover on this hard copy?
On April the 8th.
So according to that footnote, when should you start observing Passover?
On April the 7th.
That's correct. And that's what we just calculated based on the data that we have. But when we look at Google, it says that it starts on April the 8th, at the evening of April the 8th. Now, there's a couple of reasons why this could be. One reason, the conspiracy theorists will say that they're trying to get it wrong. They're trying to make us do Passover on the wrong day, which will basically leave us open to all of the punishments and curses associated with not doing Passover in the right season. But I think a more common excuse for these guys is how they lump Passover and unleavened bread together. It's like they never really think of unleavened bread. They always think of Passover and unleavened bread being the same feast. Or they exclude Passover altogether as if it doesn't count because it's not one of the mandatory feasts like unleavened bread is. And then going on to call the Feast of Unleavened Bread Passover in its stead. Or it could just be Google's fault. They were told that it was April the 8th, and they just copy and pasted this little thing on here that says Passover begins in the evening, when they should have actually said Passover began the evening before. You say, well, is this statement absolutely wrong? Well, if you consider, and talking about where it says Passover 2020 will begin the evening of April the 8th. So if you consider April the 8th as being the 14th day of Nissan, knowing that the day started the evening before, when somebody were to say that the Passover started the evening of the 14th day, they would automatically go to the day before. They would have kept it on Tuesday at April the 7th, right after the sun went down. So that, guys, is why it's so important for us to have these clear skies for us to view the new moon on March the 23rd, 24th, 25th, so that we can know for sure when the month started, so we can know exactly sure when these feast days started, when the Feast of Passover starts. But now, some of you guys are not going to go in and look for those feast days. You're not going to go out there and do the moon. But you may ask, what would I suggest that you do? And what I may do myself is I may celebrate the Passover on both nights, starting on the 7th. And then I will continue to do the Passover an additional night on the 8th. It definitely doesn't hurt to do it 2 nights in a row. The problem, I believe, is doing it on the wrong day, or not doing it on the correct day. So I may get 2 bottles of wine this year. I don't think I'm going to have 2 lambs this year, but I'm definitely going to be in the Word, trying to get the essence of the Word on both days. The evening of Tuesday, April the 7th, and the evening of April the 8th as well. All right, guys. In the meantime, be checking out the other people that go out and view the moon. There's a lot of people that do new moon reports. Be lining them up so when their new moon reports come in, you can go in and see what they have to say as far as when the new moon occurs, somewhere around the 25th or the 26th of March. And then let's come back to this one and put the information in here so we can all be correct and be on the right day. We do not want to mess up Passover, especially when all of these coronaviruses and all of these other plagues are going around, and how they're working on the third temple and all of that. It's important to get this one right, being 2020. So if you got something out of this video, go ahead and hit the like button. If you didn't, go ahead and hit the dislike button, but leave a comment either way. And shalom.